Welcome back to Homerbound, a podcast where a couple of nerds read through and discuss Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. I am Llama.
And I am Wriste.
And we're back to discuss Odyssey books 3 and 4 today. How are you feeling about it? I, first of all, want to say that our first episode of the Odyssey obviously was special because we had Dr.
Yes.
Dan. And now we're
Yes.
just back to the two of us.
Yeah, it feels kind of lonely. I don't know. I'm happy that, the past few episodes we had sort of a streak of having guest Dr. Daniel and guest Dr. Daniel. But I'm glad to be just us and we can flounder as God intended, and without getting too far ahead of ourselves because we haven't jumped into the actual discussion yet. I do like that books 3 and 4 are paired together for us. It's serendipitous that 3 and 4 are such as they are.
It really is, because in a lot of ways they should be paired together, and I'm sure we'll get into that significantly. However, before we do, I'm going to give our little content warning. We have potty mouths, we curse, we say bad words. And in addition to that, the Odyssey has some themes of violence, some adult hugging and kissing themes, and all of that should be stuff that you are aware of before you listen to this episode, or probably any other episode also, but also listen to our episodes. And with that, that's the content warning.
And also, real quick, we haven't said this enough. I've forgotten plenty of times, but we encourage everyone to read along. We are reading the Emily Wilson's translation of the Odyssey. Very fun, very good, and we'll
I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, we'll throughout the episode, of course, we'll comport ourselves as if you have read it, but we'll also try to keep the skeleton of the story there if you haven't read it for some reason. We'll have our cake and eat it too.
I think we'll very much try to do that. I think we'll have some success with that. So before we get into books 3 and 4, I'll do a little bit of a recap. Books 1 and 2, we are introduced very briefly through the proem to, the idea of Odysseus as a complicated man. We get to find out the situation in which Telemachus finds himself, surrounded by a bunch of guys, a bunch of suitors, who are eating all of his food, who are, wiping their faces on all the linens. Wasting his wealth away. And then we are introduced to Athena as well, the goddess who takes a great interest in the fate of Odysseus and in the fate of Telemachus. And Athena basically gets Telemachus started on this journey to go to Pylos and Sparta to speak to Nestor and Menelaus. And that is where we find ourselves at this point. I don't know if there's anything else you want to bring up for the recap.
No, I don't. I think that pretty much covers it. Obviously, there's some little specific shenanigans, specific to certain suitors, and the way Telemachus acts. He's still very much young. He's green to the world, and that's probably, I guess, the biggest thing to keep in mind as he's entering these interactions. He expresses this himself, I think, near the start of book 3. So it's
absolutely.
It's not too far off the intro. Yeah, that's my stamp of approval.
Excellent. Okay, cool. So so the last few lines of book 2 leave us off with Telemachus and Athena in the guise of, I believe, mentees still?
So
it's mentees or mentor, and I think it even kind of switches up back and forth.
There appears, and here's, I don't know if this is I'm going to suspect that this is a clerical error on the part of the original text. I actually have Robert Fagel's The Odyssey nearby. I could have checked to see if the same thing was there, but as you said, as you expressed in some confusion, the first, it's line 21. Telemachus responds to Athena, who is speaking to him as
mentor
person, as mentor, Telemachus addresses her as mentor, the guy whose name is mentor, not a mentor. But later, this is line 240. Telemachus addresses her as mentees.
Mentees. So you had the same confusion that I am currently still having.
I noticed it. I'm gonna chalk this up to clerical error on one thing or another. I don't know is the thing. I even checked the back of the book to make sure that mentees isn't like another name that mentor could have, because different people, like as we're aware of in the Odyssey or in the Iliad, people can have different names. So
absolutely.
maybe there was some room for that, but it didn't appear to be that way in the glossary. So I don't know. We know it's mentor. I don't know why Telemachus addressed
mentees,
Athena as mentees.
Because I remember reading that and being like, wait a minute, wasn't it mentor? Or no, it was mentees before. Wait, and still being kind of confused. In any case, I think it is meant to be mentor at this point and not mentees.
Yes.
In any case, they have set a sail and finally arrive in Pylos. And as we open this book, so this is something that I almost mentioned last time, but failed to, was that as Athena steps on shore with Telemachus, she's referred to as the goddess with the flashing eyes. So this gets back into the discussion of epithets that we've had throughout the Iliad, and the amount of variation that there has already been on this in this translation of the Odyssey fascinates me, because I think we've gotten like the flashing-eyed goddess, the gray-eyed goddess,
the bright-eyed goddess.
There have been a few already. It kind of drew my attention because this is something we will continue to see over and over when talking about Athena. Attention is always kind of drawn back to her eyes, and I just love that because it's always kind of in reference to something that seems to be lying behind them. A sparkle, a glint, a kind of indicator of greater intelligence and wit.
I guess in my mind, I tend to view like all the gods as possessing this kind of ability to flash or blaze, even in the eyes. This, of course, isn't necessarily canonized. Like Aphrodite is, at least in the Iliad, described as having eternal laughter or an everlasting smile. There's nothing like particularly flashing about her, but at least for my modern sensibilities, flashing eyes are shorthand for this person is very powerful or has a lot of narrative weight. When someone's eyes flash, you better pay attention. And
Definitely.
It's been used plenty in modern media.
It's an anime trope for sure.
It's an anime trope. It's also just like, I mean, even outside of anime, like whenever something is glowing, it's usually like exploding with power.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. And this is something that I think I'll probably be continuing to look out for, just how many variations of it we'll eventually get, or like how many times it's mentioned. Because Athena is such a huge character. Please.
Yeah, no, just to follow up on the epithets, I think it's I personally think it's very interesting that even though Poseidon is like always recognized as like a god of the sea in like modern day, almost to like a fault, to where he's like isolated to the sea, he's called the Earth Shaker.
Yeah, and actually, like, looking at the very beginning of this book, it calls him Lord of Earthquakes.
Yeah, and the Iliad did a lot of that as well. So I'm curious as to what the like great nature or true nature of Poseidon is. Like, I suspect.
Although if you think about it though, like a lot of earthquakes that humans never know or even think about happen in the tectonic plates that lie under the ocean.
They wouldn't have known that though. Obviously, we know that.
Oh, for sure.
But yeah, I mean, like Zeus was given domain over the heavens. Poseidon was given domain over the land, or like the surface, I guess, which would include the earth as well as the seas. And then Hades got everything that lies below. So I guess I don't know. I'm curious as to like what his true domain is.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. Maybe one that we'll have to put a pin in and come back to later.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, we at the very least we know that he has great control over the seas and stuff. Although the other gods have control over the seas and sorts of things as well. Like there's like the Iphigenia, a story where Artemis like stops the winds from blowing
Yeah.
for the Achaeans. But she's not the Earth Shaker. She's not uh Zeus, but she can do that. So I don't know. There appears to be a lot of overlap.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's always kind of been interesting to me about Greek mythology as a greater kind of study. Is like there's so much overlap between all of the gods and their powers. And it gets confusing pretty quickly because you have like several gods, goddesses for nature or like natural things for, just all kinds of different things. There's so much overlap. It gets confusing and convoluted very quickly.
Yeah, maybe. Again, I'm not an expert on the Greek gods, but well, we've lost ourselves a little bit in the weeds. We can revisit the gods' powers. I mean, we're gonna see plenty of them in this conversation.
Although I was gonna say, like, we're gonna continue to talk about this because
Yeah,
it's here in the text. And especially kind of in the context of what they do when they first land, which is Nestor, welcomes them and engages in all of these guest traditions and prayers to Poseidon. Basically, one of the first things they do is they pray to Poseidon.
this part actually confused me just a little bit, because in the text on line 40, he probably being
Nestor?
Thrasymedes.
Oh, Thrasymmedes or Pisistratus?
Nestor's son, Pisistratus shook hands and sat them down, spreading soft fleeces on the sand beside his father and his brother, Thrasymedes. Okay,
It's
so it would be
Pisistratus.
Pisistratus. Pisistratus, served them giblets, and he poured some wine into a golden cup and raised a toast to Pallas, child of Zeus, the Aegis Lord. And that part confused me because, as you said, the first prayer they put up is to Poseidon, but the toast is being offered to Pallas,
To Athena.
to Athena. And so I thought, okay, they're praying to Athena, but he's literally offering the cup to Athena.
Yeah, there's a lot of confusion for me at least that results from like the interchangeability of Pallas and Athena and Mentor. Because Athena, of course, is in the guise of Mentor right now, but it's still Athena. So when Nestor offers
Yes.
this cup, Pisistratus offers this cup. He's offering it to the god currently in the room, Athena, in honor
Yes.
of the god not currently in the room, Poseidon.
Yes, and she plays along. She accepts the cup, and as you said, she offers up. She makes a prayer to Poseidon, and then after that little prayer, she prays for blessings and fame to Nestor and his people, and she prays that her own quest with Telemachus back home is a safe one.
And
And then
then
after
she
that,
grants her own prayer.
yes. So, I mean, I guess our discussion on the domain of the gods is topical because this is something you could pray to Poseidon to, but Athena is apparently quite capable of answering these prayers just as well. So, and
Well,
it's
it kind of makes sense because these gods work in tandem so often and are kind of. I feel like almost sometimes like there's a master checklist and someone's just like, oh, can you check off that one of mine? And the other god is just like, okay, sure. I'm over here anyways.
there's a
Like
workflow.
yeah, there's a collaborative workflow. As it turns out, ancient Greek god workflow is actually quite modern.
This whole thing with Athena is very, that meme where Obama is putting a medal on Obama. This is
It kind of
Athena.
is, and there's a number of those moments in the Odyssey that are really quite amusing, where it's just Athena like patting herself on the back and being like, "You go, girl." But so Athena, and it literally says she made her prayer come true all by herself. So she grants this prayer, and then, as usual, Nestor gets to talking. which we love because
Yes.
honestly, Nestor's stories, and I said this several times when we were doing the Iliad, Nestor's stories, though long-winded at times, are really quite fascinating. And this one is no exception. So we start off by, Telemachus basically asks Nestor, like, hey, I'm from Ithaca. I am the son of Odysseus. I am here to see if you have any information about what has happened to him.
Mm-hmm.
And Nestor starts telling him his story of the war and the aftermath of the Trojan War. So basically, this is kind of like a little mini retelling of the Iliad and what happens after the Iliad that we don't really know about.
If you'll allow me, one thing that
Go nuts.
I noticed. I'm sorry, I'm going to keep referring to the Iliad, even though we're in the Odyssey. So you'll have to forgive me for
I was planning on doing so as well.
for the
so
aggressive
no
intertextuality. So one thing that confused me when I was reading the Iliad is that Odysseus was referred to as, back on the subject of epithets, long-suffering. We can see that he's referred to it in this text on line, it's like 84, I think. Long-suffering Odysseus. But he's also referred to that in the Iliad, which didn't make much sense when I was reading the Iliad because, like, Odysseus wasn't, like, suffering in the... I mean, not any more than anyone else.
He doesn't do that much suffering.
Yeah, I mean,
comparatively.
He gets wounded, he fights, but I mean, everyone... That happens to everyone. But when we get here, that epithet makes more sense. But I think it's interesting that the Iliad has this epithet which refers to what will happen to him well before it happens. I spoke to Dr. Daniel about this in private. I thought it was an interesting little thing to bring up, I guess. This was hotly anticipated by the Iliad.
I think one of the more fascinating things about reading the Odyssey after we just did such a deep dive on the Iliad is the little intricacies like that. The long-suffering Odysseus, when, like, is he really suffering all that much? And, the follow-ups that we get, and this happens here. We kind of get a follow-up on Ajax having died, Achilles having died, and now lying with Patroclus, and Antilochus has died. So all of these characters that we've just very recently met and talked very much about, all of whom were alive at the end of the Iliad, have all since died. One of my favorite parts of this is when he says, if you stayed here 5 years and kept on asking how many things the fighters suffered there, you would get bored and go back home again before the story ended. That just cracked me up. Like, the Iliad is boring, child. You don't want to listen to this. But so Nestor, tells him all of these things about what has happened and alludes to the fact that Zeus kind of planned this very bitter... Well, he says literally, Zeus planned a bitter journey home for us, since some of us had neither sense nor morals. So, like, all of these people who have perhaps not been the best actors in life.
Well, so what I understand, and this is some extra textual, wibbly-wobbly cultural osmosis knowledge, is that in the sack of Troy, they desecrated some temples of certain gods, and so this angered the gods, and so that is the trouble. I think that it's actually sort of covered in book 4 a little bit by Menelaus, or maybe it's in this book. I can't remember. There's so much recounting of events.
Yeah,
but there was a divide between Menelaus and Agamemnon about whether they should try to appease the gods about this before they left or something like that.
Well, I mean, it's actually pretty much next up in Nestor's retelling of what happened after the war. Yeah, so
okay,
he basically says, Menelaus says it's time to sail back home across the open sea. Agamemnon disagrees and wants to, heal what they have done with Athena.
Make sacrifices, whatever.
And so they diverge, and Nestor kind of goes off on his own.
I think Nestor goes with a group, sort of.
I think he starts off going with Agamemnon. And then, like, something makes him really uncomfortable. And he just gets this feeling of foreboding and then decides to just leave with his people.
Let's see. Well, we have the text right here. See, so those two stood and argued angrily with a dreadful clash of arms. The Greeks leapt up on two opposing sides. We slept, blah, 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 since we met at Sarm. At dawn, one group of us dragged down our ships into the sea, piled high with loot and women, while half the army remained here, stationed with Agamemnon. My friends and I set sail with all good speed. So, Nestor appears to have gone off with Menelaus,
This
whomever.
is right. Okay, this is right. Nestor goes off with Menelaus, and because Menelaus is the one of the two of them who has kind of refused to make some kind of good with Athena, he gets this like really bad feeling of foreboding and then ditches Menelaus. And then, Menelaus finds his own way home, and Agamemnon returns back home and is murdered by Aegisthus and Clytemnestra.
Yes. Okay, we've figured it out.
So the thing about this, and this is one of the things that I both like love and hate about Nestor, is like I have read this like at least 3 times in the past 2 days. And I still get confused about it because Nestor goes on. Like anytime Nestor is in the midst of things, like there's a lot of information to take in.
Because this feels like the last time on that you get in an episode, like last time on this show, and Nestor's sort of playing that role. He's getting everyone up to speed so that we can have context for what's happening.
And the part where he gets to Agamemnon being murdered also kind of serves as an opportunity for Telemachus to jump in and kind of be like, oh man, I wish I could get that kind of revenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, real quick, so when you said Nestor, he got wiggly in his stomach or whatever about it, I think that's referring to Odysseus. Your father's plans were always fixable. His men turned round their prows and sailed right back to make their peace again with Agamemnon. But I assembled all my fleet and fled. I understood some god must mean us harm. So Nestor pressed on. Odysseus turned around, which is why Nestor doesn't know what happened to him afterwards. Because that's where they parted ways.
Yeah, and then, so what Nestor says to Telemachus, though, strikes me as really frustrating. Because he basically just asks, so he says, oh yeah, no, I've been told about these suitors who are, like, plaguing your house. Is this your fault? Did you willingly submit to it, or has a god's voice led the townspeople to hate you?
I remember coming across this passage. Yeah. Here it is. Yeah. Dear boy, since you have brought the subject up, I've been told about your mother's suitors, how badly they're treating you at home. But do you willingly submit to it? Or has a god's voice led the townspeople to hate you? I don't know. I think this is a very interesting question. When I came across it, I wasn't really sure what to make of it. And this is this is the sort of question that like an old person would ask a young person when they're in trouble. It's like,
yeah,
well,
I
what
think
did you do to allow this to happen to you?
So I think my first like modern brain reaction to this was like, well, that's a little bit victim blamey. Like, it's not like this is his fault, and he's like wants this to happen. And then I thought about it a little bit more, and I kind of came to the conclusion that it's also Nestor kind of probing Telemachus to see if he can sense that there are gods involved with this. Because the one thing that we know about Nestor is he is good to the gods, and the gods are good to him. It's something that is, I think it's mentioned in the Iliad, where like he talks about how much he prays to the gods and takes faith in the gods and how they have rewarded him for that. And so this is kind of another example of him almost kind of hinting towards Telemachus to take that route and to make sure that the gods aren't involved in this, and if they are, to supplicate himself to them. That is kind of an instinctual feeling that I get to this. Because then he goes on to say that I have never seen gods display such favor as she gave when she stood by your father, talking about Athena in regards to Odysseus. Athena, who is in the room sitting next to them.
I also think that it's very interesting that as they're talking about, as Nestor's like, the wrath of Athena and stuff like that, Athena is there. I would give a lot to know what her inner thoughts are during this time.
Right?
The thing is, we're not given much of the gods' like inner thoughts. We are given very much their exterior, their external lives, but their internal lives are a little more vague, at least compared to what we get out
Obscured.
Yeah, well, like you know those parts in the Iliad where occasionally someone will we'll get their inner monologue. Like Book 22 is a great example of the in the Iliad, right? Where Hector's like, "Oh, what do I do? What do I do?"
You don't really get that for the gods. I feel like you get it on maybe a few select occasions in the Iliad, but not really.
To be fair, we are also, I think a lot of characters' inner lives are like pretty closed off in the Odyssey. We can sort of track that as we go on. This is as good a time as any to also note sort of, I guess, a shift in how things are going in terms of like storytelling, if you don't mind my pointing this out now.
Go
since
for
we're
it.
sort of in the since sort of it's sort of starting here. This is a story that involves a lot of storytelling, which is like probably the biggest contrast that I can think of stylistically, insofar as I can evaluate style, to the Odyssey, to the Iliad. There's a lot of characters just speaking to one another and telling stories, and we have to figure out what's going on based on what they say.
Yeah. There's a lot more dialogue as opposed to like third person retelling of things.
More so than just dialogue, it seems. It's almost like the speakers are taking the place of what we would like generally
poet.
recognize as the poet. Yeah. Not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but even in book 4, Menelaus uses like an epic simile
Yeah, absolutely.
in his regular speech, which I don't remember at all happening in the Iliad. We can point that out when we get there, but that for me marked like a significant shift in style. And
yeah, and I mean I think that kind of makes sense in the context of this being a story about a journey and about home as opposed to about a war and about battle. You know, it makes sense that there would be much more opportunity for sections like that as opposed to the drawn out detail that goes into, retelling a battle sequence, which is completely done from the point of view of the poet. There's none of that in here. So what do you fill it with?
And the other thing is, since we're given so much dialogue, which like you never see in like a modern day novel, we have to, or at least I feel like we have to read very more carefully than we might initially think we have to, because as I said, like we're not really given much by way of like what the characters are thinking as they're saying what they're saying. There's just stretches of speech, and we have to infer what their intentions are sometimes by the way they're talking. Some of them are really easy, right? Like we can tell when Odysseus is lying, right? Because he'll say, "My name is so and so, not Odysseus." John, not Odysseus.
I am from X Island, not Ithaca. I have many children, like, whatever.
Yeah, those sorts of things are obvious, but there are some like, more subtle things that, in any case, I'm speaking about this in like very abstract terms. Hopefully, we can, I guess, find some more concrete things as we go on.
Yeah. So to bring us a little bit back onto the current book, this goes to say that like Nestor is telling this story and kind of asks Telemachus, how are things going at home, kid? Doesn't look good. You should probably look to the gods for that. And Telemachus basically says like, oh, no, there's no hope. Even if the gods were with me, there's no hope. My dad's probably dead. And Athena kind of like claps back as This is the part where Telemachus refers to Athena as mentees, but I'm
Hmm,
going to go with mentor here because I'm pretty sure that we're still talking about Athena as mentor.
I think so.
And says, like, a god can easily save anyone at will, no matter what the distance. But death is universal. Okay, this is a line that I actually starred because I felt that this is so important. But death is universal. Even gods cannot protect the people that they love when fate and cruel death catch up with them. And then Telemachus just says, "This is upsetting, change the subject." Which I found to be hilarious. But I love this little exchange because it's like the god who is helping you is sitting right here and telling you to have hope, and you just don't know it.
It seems like she's fucking with him just a little bit.
It does.
Again, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but she also kind of does this in book 4 to Penelope, when she comes to her in a dream and she's like, "Oh, I was sent by a god. Feel better and stuff. Your son is cool." And Penelope's like, "Oh, what about my husband?" And she's like, "Oh, I can't tell you
Your
that."
son is gonna be fine. What about my?
So yeah, the
I won't say anything about that. It feels like just planting a little seedling, but also like she could just tell them it's gonna be okay. But that's not
yeah,
part of the
I
plan.
guess
It
I'm
seems like
curious
that's just
as
not
to
part of her plan.
what her end is. Like she'll benefit in some way, or if there's some special outcome that is preferable or that she prefers based on these characters being kept in the dark. I mean, to fast forward, Penelope, when she runs into Odysseus, takes a long time to be convinced that Odysseus is actually Odysseus. And we can think of that as being born of the ambiguity which Athena allows her and her son and everyone else, at least as best I can tell, in all that ambiguity.
If I had to hazard a guess, I would say it's almost kind of like beginning to test Telemachus and see if he can kind of grow up a little bit and use his like powers of observation or, his general wit to figure out what exactly is going on here. So giving him that seedling of hope, but then being like, all right, you need to figure the rest out.
On one hand, I could get behind that, but on the other hand, she does a whole lot to like help him out. Like there's great like
I think she has a little bit of like helicopter aunt going on where she wants him to figure it out, but she's like, oh, but okay, you clearly need help. Let me just do this for you.
and I mean the gods do this, I guess. They railroad people into
Yeah.
their fates, if you want. And so if she's just trying to bring about his fate or the fate of the house of Odysseus, then sure, I guess. I don't know. We can
Yeah.
put another pin in this and try to track it as
And I think so.
the story goes
One
on.
of the things I think will happen is we'll be doing that maybe a little bit more frequently than we did in the Iliad, because I think in the Odyssey there's a lot of stuff that kind of gets, again, planted as a seed and then left to grow further on down the line. At least that I've noticed that a lot, that I would come back to things from previous chapters. So it'd be like, wait a minute, there was something about that before. In any case, Nestor continues on because they ask him to, what happened to Agamemnon, what happened with Aegisthus, where is Menelaus now? And so he tells the story of what happened with Clytemnestra and Agamemnon and Aegisthus, and then talks about leaving Troy with Menelaus. I would love to like go through both of these completely, but we've, I think, glanced over it enough before. The gist of things is that Aegisthus and Clytemnestra have been having this affair. Agamemnon gets back, and Aegisthus is like, oh crap, he's back, and kills him. And then Orestes eventually comes back to exact revenge for his father's death. And then Nestor leaves Troy with Menelaus, sailing together, best of friends. Things are great. There's a storm. The guy who like navigates the ship dies, which is very inconvenient.
Yeah, it says he was shot by Phoebus, or there Phoebus with his gentle arrows shot and killed the pilot, which we can take to mean he died of sickness or illness or something like that.
And so Nestor tells him about all of this, and then is just like, "Oh, you should go see Menelaus. He's chilling in Sparta."
Well, past that, he also says, this is a bit further up, like around line 310, a little bit after line 310, after telling the story of, Orestes avenging his father. He says, that very day, this was after, I think, 8 years, Menelaus had his own wacky side adventure. That very day, rambunctious Menelaus arrived with all his ships crammed full of treasure. The moral is, you must not stay away too long, dear boy, when those proud suitors lurk inside your house. So Nestor is also, like, telling him to be mindful of the time, or, like, to remember that there are people plotting against him, or people who would plot against him.
Yeah, and that the longer he stays away from home, the more advantage he gives them to ruin his life. And to, not only ruin his life, but also, like, potentially take his life. And then as he suggests that that Telemachus go see Menelaus, Athena excuses herself away, still in the guise of mentor. And then Nestor basically insists that they have to stay the night, that it would be an insult for them to go sleep in their ships, because it would basically portray him as a poor man who didn't have enough stuff in his house to put up guests. So yet another kind of indication of these guest rights. But then so Athena says, you should let Telemachus stay here because he's the prince, and sure, I get that you have to do that, but I have to go do stuff. Athena walks off, and Nestor basically, like, grabs Telemachus's hand and says, "By the way, that's Athena. Like, you have a god at your side."
Yeah, I'm curious if, like, how much this sticks with Telemachus. It seems, I mean, this has happened once or twice in the Iliad as well, where someone's like, yes, I am not Poseidon, here to encourage you with my words, and then he, like, zooms off in a sort of cloud of cartoon dust, and they're like, that guy's way faster than normal people. That's got to be a god. And Athena seems to be doing that too. No, she transforms into I don't know what this is, an ossifrage.
I have no idea what that is, but what a wonderful word.
Hold on.
If you want to look it up while I continue to blather on about this, then we can do that.
Bearded vulture.
Oh, that's dope.
So, yeah, that's what she turns into, and she just flies away. And as best I can tell, this happens in front of everyone.
Yeah, it does. It says, bright-eyed Athena flew away, transformed into an ossifrage. Astonishment seized all the people watching, even Nestor, who then grabs Telemachus' hand and it's like, that's Athena!
If you'll humor another community reference, I can't remember who this was or what they did, but there was a character who kept trying to, like, vanish on screen, in the way that, like, a character looks away and then looks back and they're no longer there, and they're like, where'd they go? I think it was Subway.
It could have been Subway.
But, like, after a moment of looking, the camera will, like, find him, like, crouched behind a desk or behind a tree, a plastic tree or plant. Athena doesn't even do that. Like, she doesn't even be like, all right, I'm going behind this rock. Turns into an ossifrage and goes off, and people are like, oh, where'd he go?
She just up and transforms into a frickin' bird in front of everyone.
Yeah, so there's a audacity is the wrong word because the gods don't need to hide, but
I would say a brazenness.
Yeah, is very, very brazen with her treatment of her own disguise.
I just love how Nestor immediately knows that it was Athena. Like, this could have been any god potentially. Nestor knows the gods very well. And I love the little speech that he gives. So he says, "Dear boy, I am now sure that you will be a hero since the gods are on your side at your young age. This was a god, none other than great Athena, true-born child of Zeus, who also glorified your noble father." And then he launches into a prayer to her immediately, and she hears it. And they go inside, and this is like then goes into like 3 pages or something of these rituals that they carry out in honor of Athena.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the we're given in fairly strong detail, like the way in which they sacrifice a cow. They gild its horns.
Yeah.
They paralyze it. They throw its hairs into the fire, and then they kill it by slitting its throat, and then they roast the meat, and they taste the entrails, and they roast the more meat, and all that stuff. And Telemachus is getting a bath while all of this is happening. Uh, and and yeah, then I guess Telemachus goes off to Sparta in a carriage.
Yeah, and so we're about to wrap up book 3 because that's basically the end of book 3 is these rituals. But I'd love to get kind of very briefly into a conversation about like when I was reading this, all I could think to myself is this is almost like an instruction manual of sorts, like of how these rituals are intended to be carried out, how you are how you are expected to sanctify the gods, to pray in their name, to make sacrifices to them. And it just brings me back to this theme that I'll keep harping on, which is this guest right, this theme of home in the Odyssey, and how a home is meant to be in this society. And it brings me to the kind of conclusion that in some ways, I think the Odyssey is more of an instruction manual than it is a story at times, in the sense that there's a lot of direction given as to how things are properly done. And the level of detail makes me think that, and this is so true of so many stories throughout history, is that they're there for a purpose. They're there to guide the morals and the values of society. And I think this is kind of part and parcel of that.
I guess we could look at it that way. And I suspect that's like a pretty reasonable way of looking at it. It's more instructive for us since we don't know what these things are, and so it's easier for us to receive these as like, oh, this is how this went. If you're a Greek, an ancient Greek, and you probably know what these sorts of things are. You've heard of these kinds of sacrifices. What's happening could also be read as not so much an instruction as like, this is what you should do, but as a way of pointing to Nestor as, see, he's doing what you should do.
Yeah. I mean, I think it could be both, honestly, because I think it can be like, for those of you who don't know, here is an instruction manual. For those of you who do know, you're probably fucking it up. So this is the right way to do it. You know, like maybe when you're sacrificing your animal, you're not doing like this, that, and the other step, but you should be.
Well, also, so if we are to track how hospitality is portrayed in the Odyssey, it is possible also that this book and to some extent the next book, I feel like more this book than the next book, because this book focuses a lot how like who's respected first, right? Like air quotes mentor is, or Bentes or whomever is respected first because he's older when they sit, and so he's given the toast first, and they are welcomed in, and they are given food and they tell stories, and then Nestor insists that Telemachus sleep there instead of sleeping at the hulls of his ship, and then once they learn that Athena is in their presence, they immediately start they're like fire up the sacrifice,
Yeah.
and so off the back of like a relatively hostile books 1 and 2, where hospitality has been perverted. There is no real room for good hospitality. Yeah. Telemachus can't be a good host because his guests are terrible, and his guests can't be good guests because they're there for non-guesty reasons. We see like a little example of that when he greets Athena as mentees.
I was just about to mention that.
Yeah, but it's not big. Like there's no like the house is not in order. So I can't remember what the Greek thing is called. The guests the guest rights or the guest privilege.
Xenia.
Yeah, the Xenia can't properly be observed when your house isn't in order. And so Nestor's house is in order, and he can properly observe Xenia. He can be a good host, and Telemachus can be a good guest. Finally,
yeah, I think these books really kind of further that dichotomy. The bad versus the wrong way of doing things versus the right way of doing things, and what a house out of order looks like as opposed to a house in order.
Well, not so much a right way versus the wrong way, but I'm drawing upon like a fuzzy memory of the entirety of the Odyssey. Since I've read this like a couple months ago, and I'm rereading through it now. But we're seeing like iterations on Xenia. So we have like a really bad example of like how Xenia can't even be properly like observed in Telemachus's house. We're given like a microcosm of like a nod toward how you ought to act with Telemachus and Athena, and now we're given like, okay, now you've seen like the messed up version, this is like the ideal scenario.
When I talk about right way versus wrong way, I was talking about like in comparison to the suitors.
Yeah, sure. But then we're gonna get Menelaus, where it's like slightly different. Like some things are a little bit different. We can talk about that. And then we'll jump into Odysseus's journey, where Xenia is or the subject, the topic of being of hosting and guesting can be read as further iterations on what's happening.
And I think that's a really interesting way to look at it. But yeah, so I think that's probably a good place to wrap up book 3. We're going to take our little intermission.
Woo!
And refill our waters, stretch our legs, and then we will be back with you all very shortly.
Hello, dear listener. We hope you've enjoyed listening to the first part of this episode of Homer Bound. There's more to come afterward, but I'd like to take a moment on this break to say a few special thank yous. First, thank you for listening. This podcast has no sponsor. Everything is produced in-house, on our own time, and fueled by our own interests. Sharing in our interests means a great deal to us, and knowing that others enjoy the content means even more. Please follow us on our Twitter at Homer_bound for new episodes, or just keep an eye on the podcast page, wherever you happen to be listening. I'd like to give another special thank you to my friend Llama for hosting the show with me, and I'd like to thank the composer and performer of the music you've been hearing during the transitions, who has said he'd like to be known simply as Llama's father. Thank you, Llama's father. I'd also like to thank Bubbo for her contributions to the audio, Webs2D for some original art, and Total Love for additional art and graphic design, and Ghosty also for additional graphic design. Another special thank you to our numerous guests for lending us their time and expertise, and a last but not least thank you to Dr. Daniel, who anchors every one of our episodes with his insights on our discussions. We appreciate his time and energy, and we encourage you to stick around at the end of the episode to make sure you hear what he has to say. Please consider reading along with us as you listen. We are reading the Emily Wilson translation, and while reading the text isn't necessary for you to follow along, you'll likely get more out of our discussions if you have. Feel free to pause and return later if you wish to do so. Okay, thanks for sticking through our break. I'll give it back to me and Llama on Homeward Bound.
And we're back. I have refilled my tea as per usual. Wriste, I'm hoping you got a little stretch in, maybe refreshed your drink.
Yes, I have a cup of vanilla chai, and I am
Beautiful.
Very pleased with the fact that I have it. What else can I say?
Chai is great, isn't it? I love tea. I really, really love tea. That's all I have to say about that.
Yeah,
I just really like tea.
It's a solid opinion.
And now that we have fulfilled our housely traditions, I don't know, we're talking about home, we're talking about guest right. I didn't want to say guest right, though, because you're not at my house, nor am I at yours. So, not so much guest right, but I've, fulfilled my ritual, my break ritual. And now we are back to talk about Book 4, What the Sea God Said.
Yes.
And my first silly little bullet in my rubric is madness. This is Sparta. Because we are indeed in Sparta. And Telemachus and Pisistratus, who is Nestor's son, have embarked on a little carriage journey.
Yes.
To see Menelaus.
Yeah, and they get there right away. The first line is, they came to Sparta. Nothing happened.
Nothing happened. Nothing bad happened. But they get to Menelaus's, I guess, palace, I would imagine, quite a kingly sort of place. And Menelaus is having weddings. It's party time. There are acrobats, there are bards and singing and strumming. People are feasting.
And it does appear to be a palace. Line 30 says, or indicates a palace.
30?
35 or so. Yeah,
okay. Gotcha. From the palace.
Yeah.
True.
Someone rushed out from the palace, a name that I will not attempt to improvise on the spot.
And so Menelaus welcomes Telemachus and Pisistratus, and they step into this palace and are like, holy crap. This guy's got a nice house.
Also, I don't feel like we can skip over the, since we're talking about Zinnia and all that, the brief exchange between Menelaus and his guard, who runs to Menelaus and says, hey, these two godlike folks have arrived. Should we let them in, or should we tell them to go somewhere else? And Menelaus is you dum-dum. Let them in.
Why are they not inside already?
Yeah, and most importantly, he says, we too were fed by many different hosts before returning home. If you remember, Nestor said that Menelaus spent 8 years just not home. And that gap of time is what he's referring to. He had his own little Odyssey, which we'll get to read about.
Yeah. And I think it's not to be understated, or kind of forgotten how long travel took back then. Travel was not as easy as, they couldn't just hop on a plane and fly off to Sparta. Oh, we're done at Troy, let's go back. And it'll just take, a day or two. These journeys took months, if not years. And so the amount of people who spend 5 or more years making their way back home is probably a lot more than we think. Especially getting waylaid with various, visiting people, getting in other little skirmishes on their way back home.
Yeah, I'm unsure of what the the timeline is to go around all of Greece by boat. A lot of it seems to be dependent on the wind and how good the seas are. I imagine if things are going well, then travel is relatively quick and trouble-free, which I guess is why so much emphasis is placed on sacrificing to the gods before you go, praying for a safe journey, all that stuff, because the difference between the winds being at your back and the seas being not so choppy and having no winds and choppy seas is super huge.
Yeah, very true. Not only that, but I think there was also, and I could be wrong about this, I don't know a huge amount, but I think there was also a tendency to like stop for supplies, stop for just discovering things and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
You know, stop because you saw a cool looking place and it might have stuff that you can take.
Yeah, or as you said, like stopping to, I guess, refuel, for lack of a better word. I don't know. Again, I'm not entirely sure what kind of supplies you'd bring along. Like, would you bring along supplies for like so long a journey, or would you even take the time to stop at a place if you're like trying to sail straight there, or do you sail along the coast? I don't know.
I don't know.
That's for someone
But this
with
is
greater
just what
nautical
I
knowledge
would,
than
you know,
mine.
imagine. Just suffice it to say that things were not as easy as they are now.
Yeah.
And so things would have taken considerably more time than, you know, sometimes I think we take for granted how like quickly things can get done in the modern age.
Yeah. Although to be
And
fair, I think it might just be relative, right? Like
could
planes
be.
for us are really fast, of course, but like imagine in the future when we have like the ability to like teleport someone or like shove them into a tube that flies at like an incredible
when we
speed and you make it there
when
in
we
like
all
2 minutes.
finally get this when we all finally get the Star Trek technology,
Yeah.
the transporters.
Yeah, but like by then, planes is for chumps, dude.
Yeah,
You have to sit
exactly,
around for a
right?
whole hour. So I mean, I imagine that ships are like their planes, right? Like ships are super cool and they cut across things that would otherwise take forever to get to on land. Although I guess carriages, I think they said carriage is better to get to Sparta from Pylos than by sea. So here they are. But in any case,
They get to
yeah, travel.
Pylos. They travel. Which, you know, the book is called The Odyssey. It is a book about travel,
Yeah, no, absolutely.
essentially.
Getting from point A to point
Um,
B.
it is, and how very complicated it can be.
If you'll allow me
Um,
real quick to plug a television show, I might have
go
actually
for it.
talked about it. There's a television show which I think is available through Amazon Prime. This isn't like a sponsored thing or anything like that. It's a show called Patriot.
Oh, you've told me
I've
about
told
this
you about
show.
this. Yeah, it really hit me because the whole thing is about it's about a sad spy and he's trying to get something done and stuff just doesn't go his way, like, and a bunch of small things go wrong that just destroy the plan. And the whole point of at least the first season is like getting things from point A to point B. It seems simple, it's always complicated. There are a bunch of little things that get in the way. I would plug it for for that
Yeah, I
as
mean,
well
I
because I
think that's
definitely watch it.
incredibly thematically appropriate, you know? That
Yeah,
sounds
yeah,
very much like what is happening, you know,
exactly.
to our boy Odysseus, but not only that, but, you know, numerous other characters in this book. Obviously, we've just kind of heard the story of Agamemnon and Menelaus's journey back, and now we're about to hear far more from Menelaus himself.
Yeah.
So they come in, and as usual, they are welcomed with acts of hospitality. They are welcomed with food, with, you know, drink.
There's a more festive feel to it, I guess, since festivities are happening, and Menelaus has, I think, a grander estate than Nestor. Nestor, I think, is described as having like a house. When he sleeps, the text described him as sleeping in like a room in a secluded corner in the house. I'm not sure if this is an indication that he's like less well off or whatever. Maybe it's just like a personal choice. I'm not totally sure actually if there's some significance to that, but you don't get like
Yeah, I kind
a
of wonder about that.
you don't get as much of an ostentatious feel from Nestor as you do from Menelaus, who, as we'll learn, especially the source of this wealth, he's quite wealthy.
Yeah, he's got a slave girl bringing like canapes through. Like, it sounds very fancy. I will say, there's some of these passages in here that, like, I was reading and probably hadn't eaten yet, or, you know, like, I got hungry. I'm like, I want to go to a party at Menelaus's palace of canapes. Sounds amazing. But so they get inside and they start talking to Menelaus, and interestingly enough, he like expresses this regret about how the war went and how everyone he knows, has, well, at least, in terms of his brother and what happened to him, what happened to Agamemnon, that he kind of regrets having gone out into what he went into. And he says, I wish I had stayed here with just a third of all the treasure I've now acquired. If those who died at Troy so far away from Argive pastures were alive and well. Like, and he has this moment of tremendous sadness where he like starts crying, and especially um when he's talking about Odysseus. So Telemachus asks about what is going on, doesn't he?
So
No,
Telemachus,
not really.
well, Telemachus turns to Pisistratus and says, "Man, this is some cool stuff. Like this is." He compares the place to like what Zeus might have on Olympus, and Menelaus takes the opportunity
That's
to address them, and he's saying, no, not at all. Like no one can rival Zeus. This is kind of actually reminds me of Book 10 when Odysseus and Diomedes return with like this incredible team, and they're like, "Oh, this team must come from the gods," and they're like, "Oh no, a god's team would be so much better, but this is a pretty good one." It's kind of what Menelaus does. He was like, "No, I'm not as wealthy as the gods. There are some people who are probably as wealthy as me, but maybe not. I don't know." It's kind of humble bragging, I guess, but talks about how he suffered for it, and he very condensedly gives us his 8 years. My years. I was traveling through what was he list here? Cyprus, Phoenicia, Egypt, Ethiopia, Libya,
Sidon?
Sidon, and Araby. And I guess to echo or to sort of cash in on what Nestor said earlier, don't be away for too long, or else bad things might happen to your house while you're gone. Menelaus seems to share this same sentiment, but more personally, right? Because he said,
Yeah.
while I was wandering around, someone crept in and killed my brother. And that's where he
Kind of goes off the, well, not off the rails, but like he just has this really depressing moment.
he shares yeah, he shares of himself, I guess. He's as you said, he says, I wish I had just stayed here, and with only a third of all the treasure I've now acquired, if those at Troy were still alive and well. Which it's interesting that we enter this palace with like festivities, and there's so much wealth, and this is a tale as old as time. It's the rich person whose riches
Can't
don't
be
get him
happy.
the happiness that he wants. And like maybe I guess it depends on how you want to read it, or maybe he gets a little more in depth. What we'll see as we go along, I guess. But you can easily see like how he's trying to wash over the effects of the Trojan War, with like all these riches. Like you can imagine someone like trying to drink themselves out of their sadness, or party hard, or what have you. And this seems like a very kingly way of approaching that, because he's gathered so much
It
treasure in
does.
his time.
It's just such an interesting contrast to me. It makes me feel bad for him, honestly. And it also has the effect of like kind of ruining Telemachus's day if it wasn't already. Because as he gets into, how he has suffered so much and Odysseus has suffered so much, Telemachus, like, it hits a soft spot for him and he starts crying. And this is basically how Menelaus comes to realize that this is Odysseus' son sitting
Mm-hmm.
in front of him.
Just to, I guess, cash in, just to hit the sadness nail one more time. We'll cash in on like the implications of this a little bit later in the book, but he expresses like intense grief for not knowing where Odysseus is, or like if Odysseus is dead, then he grieves, or if he doesn't know where he is, then he grieves. He says, Where is it?
Well, he says his destiny was suffering and mine the
Yeah,
endless pain of missing him,
yeah.
which is like heartbreaking.
That's like a lot.
It is, but if you think about it, they've been through so much together.
I was about to say I don't remember Menelaus and Odysseus having like I'm trying to think of any interactions they might have had in the Iliad. Of course, the Iliad is only like a small fraction of the Trojan War, so it's
Exactly.
possible that we got a little bit more and more afterward.
Well, I would also reckon that, like, as two kind of ranking men within the Argive contingent, that they probably, like, officers spend a lot of time with each other. So I can see how, like, despite the fact that it's not really mentioned overtly in the Iliad, they would have probably spent a considerable amount of time together as people who respect each other, as people who were respected by the lower ranks. I can see because, like, if Agamemnon and everyone else are constantly talking about how they trust him, they have spent considerable time around him. And so it stands to reason, at least for me, that Menelaus would have been spending a lot of time with them as well. Just throughout, the 10 odd years of the war and then at least part of the journey back.
Yeah, 10 years of the war and then basically 10 years afterward, right? So this has been 10 years of the Trojan War and then 10 years afterward.
So it's been a considerable amount of
This
time
is
that
this is
they've
two
known
years
each
after
other.
Menelaus has been back.
Like, and also, the situation that war creates where you are with people that you trust that carries through further in life. That, they would have thought of each other as war buddies, basically,
Yeah, perhaps.
and had that kind of a special bond. I mean, I'm just totally speculating
Mhm.
here, but I feel like that feels reasonable to me.
Like when he says, "When I remember him, I cannot eat or sleep. Since I cannot eat or sleep, since no one labored like him, Odysseus." And he says, "His destiny was suffering, and mine is the endless pain of missing him." But you also have to remember that one, the Trojan War was launched, at least in part, on Menelaus's behalf. So he probably feels that weight, probably more so afterward.
Yeah,
Once you
absolutely.
tally the costs. I don't know how the
Although here's where things begin to get really interesting because, as we're about to find out, the reason for the entire war is back
yes, Helen
because
Helen does get to
Helen
return.
is here,
Yeah, yeah.
which I love.
Also, really, really quickly, just to finish that
Yeah,
off,
go for it.
like just to pile Menelaus's I guess sadness on his, and this will again we'll catch this out with Helen in just a moment. But so Menelaus he probably has like, or I would imagine, and I don't know this for sure. Maybe as we read, we'll find it. But I imagine that Menelaus has like his own version of what Helen was expressing in book 3 of the Iliad, right? Where she's like, "Oh, like this is all for me," and Menelaus is probably like, "Oh, this is all for me. This is all on my behalf." And actually, Helen sort of reinforces that, that Trojan War that was all for my face. Is how
Yeah,
it's
they
rendered.
made my face the cause that hounded them.
Yeah, yeah, which I think is a really cool line, rendered really interestingly. But so Menelaus says that his brother is dead, Agamemnon is dead, which is what he came back home to, and I would imagine this would feel like a betrayal, but a betrayal performed by yourself. I've talked about like the instant regret feeling.
I've made a huge mistake.
Yeah, and so when he comes back with all of his loot and stuff, he comes back to his brother being gone, and he doesn't know where Odysseus is. I suspect that he and like I don't actually know where it is on the map. I suspect that Sparta and Ithaca are like neighbors or neighborly. Uh, this book has a map in it. Hold on, I actually kind of.
I got nothing when it comes to Grecian geography.
This book has a map in it. Hold on.
All right. Well, while Wriste finds that, Helen enters the room, and once again, there's ritual here. Like, there's the giving of, setting of a special chair, spreading of wool blankets, and then gifts are brought forward. Gifts are given to Menelaus and Helen. And then I love this because this sounds almost kind of like a baller move. Helen just like walks into the room, gets all these gifts, and then sits down and puts her feet up on a stool, and then just like asks Menelaus, "Who are these people?"
I especially remember the the line where she puts her feet up.
Yeah, I underlined that and put a little star next to it. So I was just like, I like that. I love that for her.
It's a detail. It is an odd detail.
There's a lot of those.
We're not usually, at least I don't think we're usually told how people sit.
Well, she kind of asks like, hey, who are these people? But then she kind of launches into like, this kid looks like Telemachus. Or yeah, she says like, "No, this is like a carbon copy of Telemachus."
Oh
It
yeah,
really looks
I
like
missed that part.
this person who the last time I saw was like a baby. I'm pretty sure.
No, I completely missed that on my reading. I read through it today. Yeah, she's like, "Oh, this guy looks a lot like Telemachus," which is like super funny to say because like he is Telemachus.
And then she, asks Menelaus like, "Don't you think so?" And he's like, "Yeah, the resemblance is uncanny."
Yeah, none of them reach the conclusion that it is Telemachus.
Right. And Menelaus even says like, "Yeah, just now when I was talking about like my sadness about his father, he started crying. I wonder why he would do that."
Well, so if we want to as well, and we can read these, like identity is important in the Odyssey as well. Xenia and travel and storytelling, all this stuff is important. Identity is just as important, and as we've mentioned before, Odysseus is going to have to prove who he is like extensively, like agonizingly to Penelope. But Telemachus is kind of in the same boat. We glossed over it with Nestor, but Telemachus said, I'm Telemachus, blah blah blah. And Nestor, as a throwaway line, as he's sort of talking to him, he says, "If you really are Odysseus's son," and he doesn't like make a big deal out of like whether he is or isn't. But like we take our ability to identify ourselves now for granted, because we can identify ourselves. We have IDs, we have driver's license, we have social security numbers. But if you go someplace and you say, "Hey, I'm this person," how are you supposed to know who you are? Exactly. Unless you're like a god and you can sort of shortcut to the identifying. And maybe, I don't know, maybe that's something. Maybe that's a reason for why Athena holds back on not only letting like Penelope know or Telemachus know that his father that Odysseus is still alive, but even like over the course of Odysseus being in Penelope's presence, Athena never like gives that gift of identity to either Odysseus or Penelope. And we're in like a this little exchange right here is pointing directly to that, right? They're like, "Oh, it does look like him," and to us we're like, of course it's Telemachus, obviously, but in this world we don't have like a real way of knowing like who is who.
Yeah, and especially like if the last time you saw that person was when they were a baby, which I think it's implied is the case.
Well, yeah, that would be true, right? Because Helen and Menelaus, like they all left for Troy when Telemachus was a baby.
20 years ago.
It was a baby.
It was a little sprout.
Yeah, and they haven't visited Ithaca.
Just brings me back to like all the times when you would have like a family occasion, your like great aunt or uncle comes up to you and is like, "Oh, I haven't seen you since you were like this high." And I'm like, "Right, I'm like 20 now."
Who are you?
Why are you telling me that I was this high? I know. Yeah. Anyways, it's kind of that feeling though of like, how are they supposed to know what he looks like? He was an infant. And it makes it kind of funnier to me that they're like, "That really looks like Telemachus." Like, how did you know what he looks like?
I mean, in the context of that world, that it makes some sense for people to like work through like, who is this person? And so like it's funny for us because like we can instantly recognize anyone because we have Facebook and our IDs and stuff like that. But here it's like, I don't know who you are.
Yeah. So as we go through this, like Menelaus then becomes immensely happy to see Telemachus because it makes him think of his friend.
Mhm.
And then he continues to kind of reminisce and like makes everyone want to cry with like how sweetly he thinks of these people. And then, if I'm interpreting this correctly, Pisistratus, like, this kind of reminds him of Antilochus, which apparently he is close to. And he, I'm sorry, this always makes me laugh.
Okay, so
He
also remember,
says,
Antilochus is Nestor's son.
oh, I forgot that. I
No,
absolutely
I had to check the back of the book
that.
just to
So
remember, but I remember that Achilles really liked Antilochus, and that Antilochus was like significant in some way to
that
one of the
makes
kings.
sense.
And I was like, I was
Okay,
pretty sure he was
this
his
makes
son.
a lot
Yeah.
more sense
Yeah.
now. It makes a lot more sense now. Nevertheless, he says, like, King Menelaus, my father Nestor always declared you were exceptional for common sense. So listen now to me. I disapprove of crying during dinner. And so, like, let's not,
Mm-hmm.
he basically inquires as to whether Menelaus knew Antilochus. They talk about that for a little bit and then Helen drugs everyone.
Yeah, so that's interesting. Also, like, to like really establish the longing that Menelaus has for Odysseus, just to rewind a tiny little bit, I really
Yeah, go
it's
for
so
it. I glazed
interesting.
over that a little bit.
It's so interesting. Like the level of detail he goes into. He's like, I always thought that I would greet that friend Odysseus with warmth beyond all of other Argives. If Zeus let us sail home with all speed across the sea, I would have brought him from Ithaca with all his wealth, his son and people, and bestowed on him a town in Argos, driving out the natives from somewhere hereabouts under my rule. We would have constantly spent time together. Nothing would have divided us in love and joy till death's dark clouds surrounded us. So this is like,
really loves Odysseus.
yeah, and he says, I suppose the god begrudged our friendship and kept that poor unlucky man from home. He really liked him. Nothing else to really say that. But that helps it helps contextualize why he is so like easily prompted into, I guess, going on this intense sort of speech or reminiscing about
Thank you for making fun of my mistake.
No, of course not. But yeah, and so when you jump forward to as you said, Helen drugs them. She drugs them.
Yeah, so she wants to calm them all down, it seems, and kind of make sure that they get some like good rest. Because at this point, like, everyone has gotten emotional. They've probably been drinking. They've probably been eating a bunch of food, drinking, telling these stories to each other. And Helen's just like, let's take all of the pain out of this situation and give these people some rest.
Mhm.
And yeah, I don't know that I have much to say about this except for wondering, like, where this comes from.
Well, you're skipping over some like really important. So this isn't just like feels, but like the degree to which this drug affects people is fucking intense.
It is.
It says like if soldiers kill her brother, her darling son, with bronze spears before her very eyes, they'll shed no tears. That is the effect this drug has. It takes away that grief. What I'm also really interested in, right, in this passage,
is the use of the word narcotics.
No, I suspect that's just like a modernization translation, but and especially like if you've read like older academic texts versus like newer academic texts, you'll notice a difference in how pronouns are used, right? Like the author will usually say, if a doctor does this, then he will blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Whereas now we'll see like usually a mix of like he or she or they. And in this part, the text, and I don't know if this is a product of Dr. Emily Wilson's translation or if this is like something inherent to the text itself, but it says it assumes a female point of view. Helen, she decided she would mix the wine with drugs, blah, blah, blah. Whoever drinks this mixture from the bowl will shed no tears that day, not even if her mother or her father die, nor even if soldiers
Yeah,
kill her brother or her darling son. And so it surprised me because I feel like the natural or like the usual neutral pronoun that's used is usually he in
sure.
these parts.
Especially at this point in time.
Yeah, it could be, but I don't know that. So I'm wrestling with my own preconceptions. I don't want to like I'm not sure, but also yeah, I don't know. It's just interesting that this is like presented. I guess a female point of view is like very general, but like more specifically, this seems like a Helen point of view.
It does kind of. That's. I don't think that I like regarded it in that way before, but you make a really good point there. It is really interesting and kind of fascinating how that is from a female point of view. I wonder how that matches up to the Greek.
Yeah, this is an intellectual dead end for us because we stop at the like we don't know the ancient Greek, and
Yeah.
so we sort of have to move on. But the way it's rendered, and again, this is something I could probably have checked against the Fagles version just to see if there's like what kind of editorialization happened,
Yeah.
if any happened. But I also think what's really interesting is it says, then the child of Zeus, Helen, decided she would mix the wine with drugs. It's a very purposeful way of phrasing it. There's no, like, it could have been written, then the child of Zeus, Helen, mixed the wine with drugs, which is, like, more neutral, I guess. But there's, like, a decision made on her part to do so, which is interesting. It doesn't seem like she asked them.
No, it doesn't. But it I don't know, it seems like she kind of like takes over as the woman of the house, doing the kind of empathetic thing to help these men who are all clearly like really suffering, talking about all of these really sad topics.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about it either.
This passage fascinates me because I don't understand where it comes from, and I don't really understand like where it's going, I think. Like it states a purpose of like why she's doing this. It just kind of comes out of nowhere. It's not really something that we ever really see again that I can think of.
Yeah, I don't know. So, as I mentioned in the last episode of the Iliad, one of the things that I remember encountering was like this sort of this was in my time in school. It was an article, and the article expressed how upset the author was. I can't remember the author's name or the name of the article. Like how they don't really have any control over how long they grieve for like a lost family member or a lost friend. That choice feels kind of taken away from them. And like their ability to grieve is precious to them because it allows them to express their emotions and express it in a meaningful way. And it sort of means that those emotions don't die, which is in itself a representation of like how strong their bond was or something. So for Helen to decide to, I guess, neutralize these feelings is like there's an air of mercy about it, and there's also like sinister is the wrong word.
Subvertive?
A what?
Subvertive?
Not subvertive. My mind wants to say like dangerous or undesirable or dangerous might be a better word. Just because.
Yeah, I think I know what you're saying with that.
Yeah, because like if I could choose to do that to wipe away all of like those negative feelings, if you want to view them as negative, I don't know if I'd want it on hand. Or maybe this is something that she does for Menelaus regularly, and he knows about it, and this is like just standard
Like,
practice.
who knows?
I don't know.
Yeah. I think there's an interesting question of like how normal or not is this? And probably something that we'll have to come back to at some point, because I would like to move on, because the next part I think is something I referred to. It was something that I remembered when we were talking about the Iliad, and I was like, I swear to God that they talk about the Trojan horse. And they do indeed. right after
Oh, real,
this.
real quick, just to like put a tack on the
Yeah, for sure.
on the end of our conversation. Menelaus does like express to Pisistratus that like they'll stop crying, which is such an interesting thing for like an older man to say about him and his guests. I think we talked about in the Iliad about how like openly emotional like
Yeah.
men get to be in this particular culture, but it seems like Helen's decision to do this is to help that along so that they can talk without crying. If
It
we're to
seems
like
so.
tie it to a series of causal events, it's still like really strong. It's coming on very strong, but like there is that
Yeah, no,
context.
I mean, she basically like hears them saying like, "Oh, we should really stop crying." It was like, "Okay, so I'll trank them," and she does that,
There's a
which is
response.
interesting. And
Anyway,
then
sorry, Trojan horse.
we get to the Trojan horse, which is really cool. So, Helen tells a little story about, you know, in Troy, her kind of recognizing Odysseus, but not really telling any of the Trojans that she recognized Odysseus. And then Menelaus is like, "Oh yeah, quite right. Very cool." You know, she's basically saying like, "Oh, he was a really cool guy then. I liked him. I didn't give him away." And Menelaus is like, "Yeah, and he was super witty when he came up with the thing with the wooden horse." And they tell this story, and it's really kind of cool. This is, again, like these acts of just hospitality and kind of gathering around a meal and telling these stories. And you learn that, you know, they got inside this giant wooden horse, and Helen walks around the horse like 3 times, saying all of the Greeks' names, you know, in the supposedly the voices of their wives, trying to, you know, lure them into making a sound, or, you know, and Anticlus almost gives the game away, and Odysseus claps his hand over his mouth and shuts him up.
So I'm a little confused by this actually, because when Helen tells her story, her part of the story, when she runs into Odysseus in Troy, he's disguised as a beggar. She washes him and stuff, or does she wash him?
Yeah, she says she
She
washes
washes
him,
him
she scrubs him.
and helps dress him and stuff like that. And she expresses like that she's tired of the place and she wants to go. She says the Trojan women keen in grief, referring to when Odysseus kills some Trojans on his way out. But I was glad. By then, I wanted to go home. Following up that, Menelaus then describes as you said, she goes to this Trojan horse. He says, some spirit who desired to glorify the Trojans urged you on. Godlike Deiphobus was following you. If you remember, that's one of Priam's sons. 3 times he went around the hollow belly, touching the hiding place and calling on us Greeks by name. You put on different voices for each man's wife. The 9 Diomedes and good Odysseus inside the horse heard you call out to us, and we too wanted to go out or answer from in there. And then, you know, Odysseus manages to shut up like another guy. So it sounds like in one of these stories, she's expressing like a desire for the Greeks to have their victory, and the other one, like she's doing something which might sabotage it. And
Well, but he also follows that up by saying he held him there like that until Athena led you far away. So so the way I interpreted this, and I could be wrong and I'm speculating as usual, but I kind of see it as almost like the gods getting her to play her part, even though she's at this point doubting and wanting to leave. Could be wrong about that.
not sure what part she would be playing. It just seems it seems contradictory. When it says godlike
Well,
Deiphobus is sorry, go on.
considering that she finds her way back to Menelaus, and obviously, you know, they seem to have reconciled now, it could be that the Trojans felt that she was having doubts and were like, "No, you're going to participate in this because you're one of us."
Maybe I don't know. Like it doesn't seem like she was like forced to go to the horse or anything. When Menelaus says godlike Deiphobus was following you, I don't know if that means that like he was there with her or if he was like creeping around and spying on her or whatever. Again, reading ahead just a little bit, this actually sort of like is a call forward to the event when Odysseus gets to experience the sirens. This is
Yeah.
very siren-y, almost like to a fault, where Helen is sort of almost devilishly taking on the identities of these men's wives to see if they can't get if she can't get a sound out of them. And again, I don't know if she's doing this to like because she longs for the Greeks and she wants to see them or hear them, or if again it seems like such whiskey business. I don't know what.
I don't know. I think that to some degree she's like being made to play her part. Because it says some spirit who desired to glorify the Trojans urged you on, and then Athena leads her away from the situation. Athena, whom we know to be sympathetic to the Greeks. So, like, that's just the thought that kind of lingers in my head, is that, like, she's kind of still being toyed with at this point.
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know. That's just my instinct. In any case, Telemachus does not take this story well, of course, and kind of gets upset about it. You know, he says, this makes it all worse, or all this makes it worse. My father's courage could not save his life, even if he had a heart of iron.
Mhm.
So show us to bed.
Yep.
Drugs are kicking in, you know. The drugs are definitely kicking in. And they all go to bed. Helen has her slave girls lay out these like really nice purple cushions and everything. Everyone gets to go to bed. And then Menelaus walks out of his bedroom and kind of asks to get down to the truth of the matter.
Mm.
You know, what brought you here? Why are you really here? And Telemachus says, I'm here to find out, what happened to my dad, and tells him about the suitors, tells him to not soften what he's about to say out of pity for him, to give it
to me straight.
Give it to me straight. I want to know. And Menelaus, who, has had his own experiences with cuckoldry, gets really pissed and starts.
He gets pissed at the suitors.
Yeah. He gets very pissed at the suitors, not at Telemachus.
And this is where that epic simile that is usually relegated to the job of the poet sneaks its way into Menelaus' speech at the very start of this little speech at line 332. It's there. It's fun.
It is. It's a great little simile. We're not going to read the whole thing. But and Menelaus ends up wishing that, what will happen happens, which is to say that Odysseus will come back and get revenge on the suitors and, may all their lives be brief, their weddings cursed. Which, the order of that kind of cracks me up a little bit because, like, you want them to die, but also for their weddings to be cursed is a little bit hilarious. And then he goes into the story of his experience with the old sea god Proteus, which isn't it like Poseidon's father or something?
Well, Poseidon's father is definitely not still alive. I believe his father's Cronus.
No, you're right. It's Cronus. I know that there's...
Proteus serves Poseidon.
Of Egypt, who can speak infallibly, who knows the depths of the seas, and serves Poseidon.
Yeah, he is the father of a figure who appears to Menelaus.
And they say he is the one who fathered me.
Yeah, a goddess of some sort, whose name I cannot find.
Familiar relations amongst the gods, the mortals, and basically everyone in the Iliad and the Odyssey never
Eurydice. There
fail.
it is.
Thank you.
Eurydice.
Um, they never fail to confuse me every single time. I start looking at these and I'm just like, wait a minute, that's someone's father. I don't know who.
The father. There are splendid victims. I don't know anymore.
The splendid victims gets me every time. Every time in the Iliad, say splendid victims, they sacrificed many splendid victims. I'm just like, God, they're killing so many people, and every time it was animals.
Oh, but yeah, this is sort of the titular sea god of this particular book. The book is called, as you said earlier, What the Sea God Said, and this is where Menelaus learns of not only the fate of others but also of Odysseus by tricking the sea god into, well, not so much. I guess not so much tricking, but he definitely wrangles the sea god into giving him all of this divine knowledge with the help of his daughter, who disguises them as seals. It's super.
Yeah,
It's very silly.
This is great. They stuff ambrosia up their noses so they like can't smell all the
Because the
seals.
seal's skin is like super stinky. And Proteus's daughter is like, okay, when he comes out for his nap, first he counts the seals, and then he has his nap. But you're gonna disguise yourself as his seals, and I'm gonna wrap you in seal skin. Last episode I mentioned when we were talking about Penelope's her trick on the suitors and how like simple it was and straightforward, but like the details didn't matter. This is another example of one of those things that just like,
yeah,
this
absolutely.
is a solution which on its face is ridiculous, and perhaps it is, but the point is that trickery is happening.
Yeah.
And this is just further reinforced by like Proteus's daughter's instructions are just, okay, when he gets there, just hold on to him. And no matter what shape he shifts
the
into.
The best part is like he'll lie down in the middle of all the seals. Why? We have no idea.
He likes them. They're cuddly.
And then you jump on him and hold him down, and he will change into every animal on Earth, and then water, and then holy fire. And you have to keep him down. You can't let him escape, and then he'll just tell you everything.
Yeah, and the logistics of holding down water doesn't make any sense. Again, this is like the same sort of thing as with Penelope's her shroud, where like the details are absurd, but again, what's important is that they held on to him until he's done. So there's like a disregard has negative connotations. There is a carefreeness about the logistics, and how the logistics really don't matter. What matters is that they did it and it worked.
Yeah. And what Proteus ends up telling them is like, you all messed up by not making sacrifices to Zeus and the other gods to speed your journey home. And until you do that, you're going to continue to have a bad time. And Menelaus is just like, oh, okay, I'll do what you say, but, like, did everyone else die?
And we're given a nice little, like, tragic journey home greatest hits. And I when they say Ajax drowned, Proteus says that Ajax drowned. I think that this is little Ajax. This is lesser Ajax.
I was wondering that, too.
Because, well, so we know from the Trial of the Arms...
Ajax and Achilles...
Ajax and Odysseus fought over Achilles' arms, right? His incredible armor. Odysseus won because he's better with words. Ajax swore to kill everyone, but the god struck him with madness, and he killed a bunch of cows. And then he was like, "Oh shit, I fucked up," and he fell on his own sword, Hector's silver-studded sword, and that was the end of him. I suspect that's canon here because in a later book, Odysseus, when he's in the underworld, sees Ajax, I'm assuming great Ajax, and Ajax does not want to talk to him because...
Well, I was going to say, isn't it Nestor who says that Ajax and Achilles both lie dead, like, out at Troy?
Yeah, he might have said that.
And then here, this is this Ajax is drowned. So like it kind of has to be the other one,
Yes,
doesn't it?
I think this is little Ajax, lesser Ajax, and he describes him as like, what an asshole. It's like he makes it through like bad waters or something, and he would have lived, but he was like, aha, I made it through as a result of my having bested the gods. And then Poseidon like cuts the rock he's sitting on in half and drowns him. And Agamemnon,
Which
uh,
bold move, dude.
yeah, and of course he gets the details of how Agamemnon died. The irony, of course, being that Agamemnon did the right thing and chose to try to appease the gods before leaving, and he sure got there nice and quick, but he got there to absolute disaster and was quickly killed by Aegisthus and a bunch of dudes. Yeah, he was killed at dinner. he invited him.
Poor guy.
He invited him over for dinner, and then he killed him.
Couldn't have happened to a nicer person. Wait. No, I do have more sympathy for Agamemnon than I once did, but you know.
It's not a great way to go. I mean,
It's not a great way to go at all, and it certainly isn't, you know, the type of. Well, I mean, first of all, you shouldn't be killing someone in their own home anyways, but you certainly shouldn't be doing it at dinner. And then Proteus continues on by, you know, telling Menelaus to get home. You know, Menelaus is extremely distraught by this. And Proteus tells him, go home, you might still be able to avenge your brother's death with Orestes. By the time he gets home, that has already happened.
Yeah. And we also...
And then,
yeah. Oh, sorry, go on.
And then he says, no, now I know about these two, but what happened to Odysseus?
We're given like a really brief little, he's trapped on Calypso's island, and she's not letting him leave. That's kind of all we get from him.
Yeah, except that, you know, we now know that Odysseus, at least the last time he was seen, was alive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and then sorry, go on.
No, please go for it.
I was just gonna bring it home, and you know, this is sort of marks the end of Menelaus' tale. He closes out by saying, "Yeah, and then I got home. The problem was he had to sacrifice. The reason why I couldn't get home was because he had to sacrifice like 100 oxen or something in Egypt, which he did eventually, and he sailed home with a whole bunch of like treasure and wealth and gifts and stuff. And then he says to Telemachus, like, you know, this is
stay with me for a week and a half.
Yeah, stick with me until 11 or 12 days have passed. Then I'll send you off with 3 horses and a gleaming chariot as gifts and a cup."
Yeah, and Telemachus basically says, like, I would love to do that. I like listening to you so much, I would stay here for like a year, but I kind of have to get going. These guys are ruining everything at home.
He's heeding Nestor's explicit warning and Menelaus' implicit warning, both of which are don't be away from home for too long when there are enemies about. So he takes that good advice. And also, and this is sort of where we can compare and contrast this example of, I guess, Xenia or hospitality or what have you with last books, where Telemachus asserts himself more as a guest and says, when Menelaus offers him the horses, those horses won't do him any good. These are not good gifts for me because we don't have
Ithaca's
horse land.
It's goat country.
Yeah, they love their goats. They do not have good land for grazing and stuff. So please just give me treasure, and I also have to go.
Yeah, and Menelaus, like, I find it interesting that what he says to this is, my boy, your words are proof of your good blood. He's kind of recognizing that Telemachus is learning to find his way and his nobility and present that face forward. And he basically assents, you know, he says, yeah, sure, we'll give you different gifts. Here's a really nice silver bowl that Hephaestus made. Like, that's a dope gift.
Yeah, and so like in book 3 with Nestor, where Nestor sort of does everything right, and he gives Telemachus like what he needs right then. He's like, hey, it's better to get to Sparta on land, take this carriage, have my son help you out. Menelaus just sort of gives him something, and which is not to like
Yeah.
speak against his efforts to honor his responsibility as host. But this is not as perfect as Nestor. He is not aware of what kind of gifts would benefit someone from Ithaca, and so Telemachus like politely says, or gently says, something else would do.
This might be better.
I can't use horses. And then we sort of get the last little section. We have a nice little cut from here back to home.
To kind of form the ultimate contrast with all of this good hospitality that we've seen, we flash back to Ithaca, where the suitors have now discovered that Telemachus is gone, and he hasn't just wandered off like in the neighborhood. He has gone, on this little journey, and they're just like, oh, we didn't think he was that smart. How could he have gotten away? I think it's a servant or someone. Oh no, it's Noemen, son of Phronius. I don't know if I am exactly familiar with who that is.
He is a servant.
Okay, that's...
Oh, wait, sorry, no. Sorry, I'm thinking of someone else. Yeah, he's just a guy, I guess.
He's just a guy, but he basically, does anyone know when Telemachus is getting back from Pylos and the suitors are like, I'm sorry, what now?
Back from where?
Back from where? And, they kind of go on to start plotting to kill Telemachus when he gets back.
Yes, very, very loudly. They're sort of like, we'll definitely kill him. And Antinous is like, shh, it's not so loud.
Shut the fuck up! Don't tell everyone.
Also, really quickly, just to point out, Noemen says that he saw Mentor embark on the ship as captain.
Oh yeah, this is the part where
here.
He's like, wait a minute.
And
no one.
Yeah, and no one responds to it. No one's like,
wait a minute.
Telemachus goes with a god? Yeah,
I think they're all too caught up in their own, machinations and scheming to really understand the significance of that statement, because nobody comments on it. But it's like that moment where it's like, has anyone ever seen them in the same room? And so the suitors just start openly plotting Telemachus' death. But word also makes it back to Penelope that Telemachus is gone, and of course she doesn't know this yet, because what is her nanny Eurycleia has been ordered by Telemachus not to tell her until 12 days are passed.
Yes.
Or until she finds out otherwise, and then to tell her.
Yes, which she expresses to Penelope, and Penelope is very understanding, but now she knows, so she tells her to get a bath and change her clothes, and just try to not freak out.
Yeah, and she also yet again prays to Athena, and Athena hears her pray. So Athena hears her pray to, protect Telemachus, to save him, protect him from the abuses of the suitors. And she wails, and Athena hears her prayer. So, Athena is always watching when this family calls out for her. The suitors continue to, boast and brag about how they're going to kill Telemachus.
Oh, Telemachus is going to die. Penelope has no idea. It's so almost cartoonish and comical.
It is. Honestly, I get very, almost kind of Three Stooges vibes, or, Marx Brothers vibes.
Sure.
Of just these old-timey, almost kind of slapstick situations. Obviously not the same storylines or anything like that, but
yeah,
just this, yuck, 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 they'll never find out, they said loudly in the reverberating courtyard.
Yeah, and I was going to say, and this is if you won't mind the transition, this is where we find ourselves in that dream that I mentioned earlier. I think
Yeah.
it was we were talking about the last book, I think, where Penelope receives a dream from Athena, basically comforting her. She sends her a phantom in the midst of her dream, saying that basically, yeah, he's got Athena at his back. He is completely cool. Like, don't worry about him. This is also where Athena plays coy with the information about Odysseus, where Penelope's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, if you're a god, then where you know where my husband is?" And she's like,
I cannot tell you whether he
"It's
is
a
alive or
mystery."
dead. It is not good to speak of things intangible as wind, which is not. It's not intangible. It's extremely tangible to Athena.
Yeah,
She knows exactly where Odysseus is.
I highlighted those 3 lines. I cannot tell you whether he is alive or dead. It is not good to speak of things intangible as wind. And I just put like 3 question marks next to it. I was like,
what?
"Come on, Athena, you can do better than that." But this was enough to like calm her heart. She's no longer worried about her baby boy.
Yeah. She's no longer worried about her baby boy, and I would imagine that she has at least somewhat of a feeling that, like, the lack of definitive news about Odysseus is possibly a good thing. I don't know. Again, speculative, but she certainly is assuaged to know that Telemachus is going to be okay. And meanwhile, a group of the suitors, or at least people, no, it's a group of the suitors. They sail to a little island, like, right off the coast of where Ithaca is, kind of lying in wait for Telemachus to come back so that they can ambush him.
Yeah. It's a rather sinister ending, but
it is.
It makes me think of like a Disney scene where like people with like, you know, handkerchiefs over their, like, wrapped across their faces, like bandits or whatever. It's like sneaking around.
And so one of the things that I find interesting about these couple of books is that, like, I know throughout this, I've kind of just gone through at times and been like, and then this happened, and not really, like, known exactly what to say about it, because in some ways, I feel like the Odyssey is at times more, like, straightforward. And it just kind of tells you stuff that happens. And there's certainly a lot of meaning to be taken from it. But it just kind of drives home for me how much of a storytelling book it is.
There are some things that are straightforward. If there's one thing that I guess is open for almost endless speculation, is Penelope. I think in in Dr. Emily Wilson's introduction, Penelope, she describes Penelope as a black box, or something of the sort. Because as we just said, like, we don't, like, we can make what inferences from this dream that, like, we might make. Like, if there's a god protecting Telemachus, then maybe this spells good news for the house, or maybe this spells better news, or as a more hopeful outlook for, like, Odysseus. But we don't know what she thinks.
No, they never tell you.
Yeah, and even when it gives us the reason, like, why she was glad, it's just because she dreamed so clearly in the night. Like there's no, like, because she had renewed hope that her husband would return, or she had,
or that this comforted her.
Or that she didn't fear the suitors so much anymore, because she had spoken with a god, or something like that. She's very closed off to us, and we have to work very hard to figure out what exactly it is she's thinking. I think as we get to the later books where she features more prominently, especially with Odysseus around, we'll get to engage with her in that way. I think a lot of the characters are like this.
Yeah, and I think, like, so in part what I was saying about, like, how straightforward things can be at times also means that there's so much more to question. Because, like, if you are told just this thing happens, and this thing also happens, sometimes you're just like, but why? I mean, seriously, it often leaves me questioning, like, I know that this is here for a reason. and that we're being told this and given this information. And I think Penelope is a great example of that. You know, we're being given this information for a reason. This dream is not just mentioned for like shits and giggles.
Yeah, the text and the subtext are very much separated, like water and oil. Whereas
Yeah.
in the Iliad, I feel like they're more readily mixed together, and we can sort of read both at the same time. In this, we
I
have
think
to.
there's more allusion to what is actually going on in the Iliad, which is not necessarily what I expected.
In the Iliad or the
In the Iliad, like, or just the contrast between the two books, like
yeah.
the contrast between these two epic
Oh yeah,
poems,
yeah.
and how like I think I probably would have expected the Iliad to be more inscrutable, but I'm having an easier time with the Iliad as opposed to the Odyssey, I think.
Could be,
Does that
yeah.
make any sense? You know?
No, I could. I mean, I guess so. I mean, it depends on how you want to see it, right? Because the Odyssey can very much, as I said, the text and the subtext are, I feel like, are more easily separated. You can read the Odyssey just as a story as it is, which I think is why, like, it's like generally the first thing you encounter in terms of Homer, you know, because there's
Yeah.
so many like stories, right? Like Odysseus and the Cyclops and the Sirens and
Sirens.
Calypso and Circe and so on and so forth, and him shooting the arrow through the axes. Like there are so many, like, I guess, if for lack of a better word, iconic story beats or stories that you can engage with without having to really engage with the subtext. Like you can wipe away the subtext and still have like a good story to read. But if you want to find the subtext, I think that's like it's going to be you're going to have to wade through the text first, I guess, in order
Yeah.
to figure that out, is what I'm saying.
I think in the Iliad they like cohabit the same space a lot more frequently.
I think so. I guess we'll find out. We'll have to focus and keep an eye on how true that is. But I suspect
Yeah,
that's true.
absolutely.
I suspect that'll remain true.
But on that note, you know, with Penelope's dream comes and the suitors lying in wait in the craggy islands between or off the coast of Ithaca is where book 4 ends. And I think that kind of question is a wonderful place to put a pin in that and say that we will see you all next time, but not before you listen to Dr. Daniel's tag, which should be
Yeah.
coming up right after this. See you guys next time.
Hello, everybody. My name is Daniel, otherwise known as Dr. Daniel, Dr. Dan, or the Dancing Grad, and I'm here to offer some thoughts on Wriste and Llama's conversation about the Odyssey, books 3 and 4. There were a lot of excellent points brought up that I want to comment on, so I'm going to do my best to keep this tag short and sweet. First off, Llama and Wriste point out an inconsistency in Book 3. The narrative situation is that the goddess Athena has assumed the guise of Mentor, who is a trusted friend of Odysseus, in order to accompany Telemachus on his journeys. You see this at line 22, when Telemachus addresses Athena as Mentor, but then at line 240, he addresses Athena as Mentees. This actually seems to be a mistake in the translation, in the way that it's printed, because according to my Greek sources, at line 22 and 240, at both instances, the name that is used there is Mentor. The confusion stems from the fact that Mentor and Mentees are very similar names, and in fact, Mentees had appeared in Book 1 as another disguise that Athena had assumed, at line 105. Mentees is the leader of the Taphians, a guest friend of Odysseus, whose identity is assumed by Athena, but also Mentor is a trusted friend of Odysseus, whose identity is also often assumed by Athena. Those are the descriptions as presented in the glossary of Dr. Emily Wilson's translation in the back of the book, and it also comes with some pretty handy citations of where these characters appear. So this does seem to be a mistake of the translation, so great job to Llama and Wriste for their eagle eye. Next, there was a question about Poseidon in his capacity as having dominion over earthquakes, or the earth. And what's really fascinating about this is that, exactly as Wriste and Llama point out, Poseidon is often associated with the sea, and rightfully so, because Poseidon does a lot of things that have to do with the ocean. However, the name Poseidon seems to derive from Proto-Indo-European roots for words that mean husband and master, and water. So that's where that idea of him being a sea god comes from. But some scholars tried to link the name Poseidon to a Proto-Indo-European root that means earth. And that gives rise to one of Poseidon's epithets, the earth shaker, or the one who shakes the earth. As was pointed out, however, the Greek gods were not limited to any one single domain. Dionysus, for example, is not only the god of wine, revelry, and turning up on a Saturday night, but also of the theater. So for Poseidon to have two domains, over the sea and over the earth, namely with earthquakes, isn't too far outside of the realm of possibility. Next up, Helen's drugs, as described at the passage that begins around Book 4, line 220. The drugs themselves get referenced about 3 times throughout this passage, at line 220, 227, and 230, and Dr. Wilson translates them respectively as drugs, and narcotics. The same word, however, is used in all 3 instances in the Greek, pharmakon, which is a term that is used to indicate medicine of some sort, but also drugs, as are indicated here. What kind of drugs are we talking about here? And for an answer to this, I'm turning to a commentary on the Odyssey by W.B. Stanford, wherein he comments on this use of the term pharmakon. Quote, Homer gives no clue to the identity of this pharmakon, of this drug, except that it was Egyptian, probably vegetable, and not liquid. Namely because this is something that you throw in, bale, is the verb that's used there, rather than poured in, using a verb like kewo. Continuing the quote, many guesses have been made, including coffee, but the most plausible is opium, end quote. And the idea of opium being used here as a drug actually makes a lot of sense. Opium was collected and cultivated since the mid-4th millennium BCE, starting primarily in the area of the Middle East with the Babylonians, and also the Egyptians were known for collecting and cultivating opium as well. The idea of using a narcotic to dull the pain, however, has some really interesting implications for the larger arc of the story. What's more healthy in the long run? Suppressing painful thoughts and painful memories, or working through them to try to come to a more healthy place on the other side? This idea of working through the past in order to come to a stronger place on the other side is going to become a really interesting theme when Odysseus and Penelope eventually reunite later on in the story. Within this description of the drugs, there's a very interesting lexical feature that Wriste pointed out. In our modern patriarchy-infused sense of the English language, we tend to default, unrightfully so, to the masculine as a sort of a generalizing sentiment, he as opposed to she, it, or they. Dr. Wilson's translation, however, uses the feminine to refer to this generalized person. I'm quoting here from line 223 onward in Book 4, whoever drinks this mixture from the bowl will shed no tears that day, not even if her mother or her father die, not even if soldiers kill her brother or her darling son with bronze spears before her very eyes. In the ancient Greek, there are 4 words within this passage that impact our understanding of the way that gender is used in this generalizing statement. 1 works against Dr. Wilson's use of the feminine here, and 3 can be used to support it. First of all, the word whoever is rendered in Greek by the pronoun hos, which is typically a masculine nominative and singular pronoun. So that leads us to expect, again in a patriarchal way, the use of the masculine to refer to a generalized person. An adjective used to describe that person in line 223, however, is ephemerios, and there are 2 different forms of this adjective. Ephemerios, ephemerion, wherein the form ephemerios can refer to a masculine or feminine entity, and there's also another version of the adjective that has a masculine, feminine, and neuter version, so different forms for different genders of the adjective. Here, however, we can't really tell which one is being used, so it's plausible that ephemerios can describe a feminine entity. 2 other pronouns in this passage that lend some power to Dr. Wilson's use of the feminine here are the pronouns hoi and hoi in successive lines, line 224 and 225. It's these pronouns that Dr. Wilson uses to render her mother or her father, and also her brother or her darling son. This pronoun hoi is in the dative case and helps us understand a sense of possession here, but the interesting thing about hoi is that the same form is used in Homeric Greek for either a masculine antecedent or a feminine antecedent. The entire passage, however, hinges on that masculine nominative singular pronoun hos, that whoever. So while I absolutely support using the feminine here, and there is some linguistic help for that interpretation in the adjective ephemerios and the pronoun hoi, I think we do have to acknowledge that this subtly changes what is actually being said in the Greek, beginning this passage with a masculine pronoun rather than a feminine one. One last point that I want to make is about the seemingly incongruous or kind of silly episode of Menelaus and the seals. As I've mentioned in previous tags, one of my favorite questions to ask when faced with an element of a narrative that seems kind of weird or out of place is why? What is this part of the story doing here? And how does it help us understand other parts of the story or the way that the story flows? Menelaus' story obviously resonates with the idea of Odysseus trying to get home. But the use of Proteus, the famous shapeshifter, in order to help Menelaus understand how to do so seems very deliberate here. The adjective protean derives from the name Proteus, indicating an ability to adapt or change given a circumstance. This means needing to be witty and quick on your feet in thinking through a situation. This adaptability and changeability seems right up Odysseus' alley. He's described in the very first lines of the poem as polutropos, as a man of many ways, and he's known since the Iliad as a man who's able to think quickly on his feet. This adaptability, changeability, is going to be very necessary when Odysseus finally makes his way back to Ithaca, so that he can avoid detection by the suitors and finally get his revenge. This also puts him in the company of gods and goddesses like Athena, who herself has assumed many different disguises by this point in the story. I do want, however, to resist the urge to sort of focus everything through the lens of Odysseus. The story is indeed called the Odyssey, but here we are at the end of Book 4, and we've seen neither hide nor hair of Odysseus himself. Based on these first 4 books, we might even more accurately call the Odyssey a coming-of-age story for Telemachus. He's the character that we're focusing on for these first 4 books of the Odyssey, and Menelaus and Helen point out his sort of growing up arc when they point out how alike to Odysseus he is, and how he seems to have grown into a nice young man from being a baby the last time that they saw him. So when we finally do see Odysseus firsthand in the narrative, it's going to be interesting to analyze the ways in which his character arc, in which his story, intersects or doesn't intersect with the other characters, given the fact that we've just spent 1/6 of the Odyssey focusing in on his son, Telemachus. In any case, that's about all I have, so thank you all for listening, and with that, I'll throw it back to Llama and Wriste.
Thank you once again, Dr. Daniel, for your time and insight. Always enjoy hearing what you have to say about our discussions, and thank you, dear listener, for tuning in. We hope you'll take the opportunity to read along with us, since there's plenty to love in these stories, and please keep an eye out for our follow-up episodes by following us on Twitter at Homer_bound, or wherever you happen to be listening to us now. We hope to see you in the next episode. See you then.